For years, these murder cases baffled investigators, leaving families without answers and communities in fear. But today, we uncover the shocking truths behind 7 murder cases that were finally solved. From cold cases cracked by DNA to shocking confessions, these stories will leave you speechless. Viewer discretion is advised. Some details may be disturbing. Let's dive into the first case. First on our list is the murder of Hae Min Lee. The disappearance of Hae Min Lee in 1999 gripped Baltimore. Hae Min Lee, a bright and popular high school senior, vanished on January 13, 1999. Her body was discovered weeks later in Leakin Park, and her death was ruled a homicide by manual strangulation. Suspicion quickly fell on her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, who was convicted of her murder in 2000. The case largely hinged on the testimony of a friend, Jay Wilds, and cell phone tower data, both of which were later scrutinized. For years, Adnan maintained his innocence, and in 2014, the podcast serial brought the case to international attention, raising questions about the evidence and trial process. The public became captivated by the inconsistencies and the possibility of a wrongful conviction. Fast forward to 2022, a groundbreaking development emerged. New DNA testing, unavailable at the time of the trial, failed to link Adnan to the crime scene. Additionally, alternative suspects, whose potential involvement was never fully investigated, were identified. These revelations led prosecutors to vacate Adnan's conviction, citing a lack of confidence in the original case against him. Adnan Syed was officially released after spending more than 2 decades behind bars. His story underscores the importance of re-examining evidence with modern tools and the potential for justice to evolve with time. Sometimes, justice takes decades, as in our next story. The murder of Sarah Yarboro. A high school cheerleader's murder in 1991 haunted Washington for decades. Sarah Yarboro was just 15 years old when she was found murdered on a dirt path near her home in Bellevue, Washington, in 1991. A popular cheerleader with a bright future ahead of her, Sarah's death shocked the local community. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled, but despite an intensive investigation, the case went cold. There were no clear suspects, and no physical evidence that could lead to an arrest. Her family was left in a state of limbo, searching for answers in a case that seemed to be slipping away with time. For nearly 3 decades, the murder of Sarah Yarboro remained unsolved, leaving both her family and the community devastated. Detectives continued to revisit the case over the years, but each new lead ended in a dead end. It seemed as though the mystery of who had taken Sarah's life would never be answered. Then, in 2019, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge technique, which had already helped solve other cold cases, was applied to Sarah's case. Investigators began by testing DNA found at the crime scene, which had been preserved for nearly 30 years. The DNA was compared to genetic databases, and within a matter of months, they had a match. The DNA pointed to a man named Patrick Nicholas, a 53-year-old from the area. At the time of Sarah's murder, he was living just a few miles from her home. However, despite this match, investigators needed more than just DNA to confirm his involvement. They began to build a case, tracing Nicholas's whereabouts on the night of Sarah's murder and uncovering more evidence that linked him to the crime. It was later revealed that Patrick Nicholas had a history of violent crimes, and his DNA had been added to the national database after a previous conviction. His arrest was the culmination of years of painstaking detective work and the innovative use of genetic genealogy, which had revolutionized the way cold cases were being solved. In 2019, Nicholas was arrested and charged with the murder of Sarah Yarboro. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Sarah's family, this marked the end of nearly 30 years of uncertainty and pain. The closure they had longed for finally arrived, bringing some measure of justice for Sarah's tragic death. Sarah's case is a testament to the power of modern technology and the relentless pursuit of justice. It also serves as a reminder that no matter how much time passes, the truth has a way of coming to light. The Yarboro family, after nearly 3 decades, could finally begin to heal, knowing that the person responsible for their daughter's murder was behind bars. Up next is the capture of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's charm masked his horrific crimes. Ted Bundy was a man who could blend into any crowd. He was intelligent, charismatic, and good-looking, qualities that helped him gain the trust of his victims. But beneath his charming exterior was a ruthless serial killer responsible for the deaths of at least 30 young women across several states in the 1970s. His ability to deceive and manipulate made him one of the most notorious criminals in American history. Bundy's killing spree spanned across multiple states, including Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. His victims were typically young women with long, dark hair parted in the middle, a pattern that would later be recognized as his signature. Bundy would often approach his victims in public places, feigning injury or disability to lure them in. Once he had gained their trust, he would abduct them, assault them, and ultimately murder them. His gruesome acts were calculated, and his ability to evade capture for so long was a chilling testament to his manipulative skills. In the early stages of his crime spree, Bundy was able to avoid the authorities, who had little to go on. His victims were often found in remote areas, and there were no immediate connections between the murders. Bundy's ability to change his appearance and move between states made it difficult for law enforcement to track him down. But as the body count rose, so did the pressure to catch the killer who had been terrorizing the country. In 1975, Bundy was finally arrested in Utah after a police officer pulled him over for a routine traffic stop. The officer noticed suspicious items in his car, including ski masks, handcuffs, and other tools that would later be linked to his crimes. Bundy was taken into custody and charged with the kidnapping and assault of a woman named Carol DeRange, who had managed to escape from him. This arrest marked the beginning of Bundy's unraveling. At the time of his arrest, Bundy was not yet a suspect in the murders, but his connection to the crime spree soon became evident. Investigators linked him to several unsolved murders, and his fingerprints were found at the scenes of multiple crimes. His capture was a major breakthrough in the case, but it wasn't the end of his reign of terror. Bundy's trial began in 1979, and it was a spectacle that captivated the nation. He represented himself in court, using his charm and legal knowledge to try to manipulate the proceedings. Despite his efforts, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Bundy was convicted of the murders of two young women, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, at Florida State University. The trial was a dramatic moment in American criminal history, as Bundy's charismatic demeanor contrasted sharply with the brutal nature of his crimes. Ted Bundy was sentenced to death, and he spent nearly a decade on death row. During this time, he confessed to 30 murders, though some experts believe the true number of his victims could be much higher. Bundy's confession was a chilling revelation, as he described in detail the horrors he had inflicted on his victims. His trial and conviction brought some sense of justice to the families of his victims, but the horror of his crimes would never be forgotten. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. His death marked the end of one of the most infamous killing sprees in American history. Bundy's capture and subsequent trial were a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice, and his execution brought a sense of closure to the families of his victims. But Bundy's legacy, marked by his manipulation, charm, and horrific crimes, continues to haunt the public's imagination to this day. From notorious killers to lesser-known cases, our next story is equally shocking. Next is the murder of Sherrasmason. In 1986, Sherrasmason was murdered in her own home, and the case went cold for decades. Sherrasmason, a 29-year-old nurse, was found dead in her home in Van Nuys, California, on February 24, 1986. She had been brutally beaten and shot, and the scene of the crime suggested a violent struggle. The police initially believed the case to be a botched robbery, but as they dug deeper, they realized this was no ordinary home invasion. The investigation quickly became more complicated. There were no signs of forced entry, and the victim's car was left untouched in the driveway. Sherry's family and friends were devastated, but they had no answers, and neither did the authorities. At first, the police suspected Sherry's husband, John Ruetten, but he was quickly cleared of any involvement. The case went cold, and for years, no new leads emerged. The investigation stalled, and Sherry's family was left with more questions than answers. It seemed as though her killer had slipped through the cracks of the justice system, and the case was all but forgotten. Then, in 2009, more than 2 decades after Sherry's death, the case took a dramatic turn. DNA evidence that had been preserved from the crime scene was re-examined. Among the evidence was a bite mark on Sherry's arm, which had previously been overlooked. Forensic experts were able to extract DNA from the bite mark, and when they compared it to a national database, they found a match: Stephanie Lazarus, a former LAPD officer. Lazarus had been working as a detective at the time of the murder, and her connection to the case was both shocking and unexpected. It was later revealed that Lazarus had been in a tumultuous relationship with Sherry's husband, John Ruetten, before Sherry and John got married. The motive for the murder appeared to be jealousy. Lazarus was reportedly angry that John had moved on and married Sherry. She had been stalking the couple and had even confronted Sherry in the past. Lazarus had kept her involvement in the crime hidden for years, but the DNA evidence was undeniable. In 2009, after a lengthy investigation, Stephanie Lazarus was arrested and charged with the murder of Sherrasmason. Lazarus's trial began in 2012, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. The DNA from the bite mark, along with testimony about her motive and the years of suspicion surrounding her, made it clear that she was the killer. In 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison, and the case that had gone unsolved for more than 2 decades was finally brought to justice. For Sherry's family, this conviction brought a long-awaited sense of closure. They had spent 23 years without answers, but at last, they knew who had taken their loved one's life. The case was a reminder of the power of modern forensic science and the importance of never giving up on justice, no matter how much time has passed. Up next is the disappearance of Anton Patz. The 1979 disappearance of 6-year-old Anton Patz shocked the nation. On May 25, 1979, Anton Patz, a 6-year-old boy from New York City, vanished without a trace. Anton had been walking to his school bus stop in the morning, just a few blocks from his home in the Soho neighborhood of Manhattan. His parents, Stan and Julie Patz, had always trusted Anton to make the short walk on his own, but on this day, he never arrived. The disappearance of Anton sent shockwaves through the city and the country. It was one of the first high-profile missing child cases to receive national media attention. For days, the Patz family, along with police and volunteers, searched the streets of New York, but there was no sign of Anton. His case quickly became a symbol of the dangers that children faced, and the media coverage was relentless. But despite the intense public interest, no solid leads emerged. The investigation into Anton's disappearance dragged on for years, and the case eventually went cold. The Patz family was left with more questions than answers, and the mystery of what happened to Anton haunted the public consciousness. But even as time passed, the case never lost its grip on the nation. In 2012, a breakthrough came when a man named Pedro Hernandez was arrested in connection with Anton's disappearance. Hernandez, who had worked at a convenience store near Anton's home in 1979, had been a suspect for years. He had confessed to the crime in 2012, claiming that he had lured Anton into the store, strangled him, and then disposed of his body. Hernandez's confession was chilling, but it was also controversial. His initial confession had been made to police in 1981, but it had been dismissed at the time due to inconsistencies in his statements. For years, Hernandez had denied any involvement in Anton's disappearance. However, in 2012, after being questioned again, he gave a detailed account of the crime, which led investigators to re-examine the case. The confession was enough to charge him with the murder of Anton Patz. Despite his confession, there were questions about Hernandez's credibility. His defense team argued that he had a history of mental illness and that his confession had been coerced. But the prosecution believed his confession was genuine, and they built their case around it. In 2017, after years of legal battles, Hernandez stood trial for the murder of Anton Patz. The case was complicated by the fact that Anton's body had never been found, and there was no physical evidence linking Hernandez to the crime. But the prosecution presented a compelling case, relying heavily on Hernandez's confession and the details he had provided about the crime scene. In February 2017, Pedro Hernandez was convicted of the second-degree murder of Anton Patz. The verdict brought a sense of closure to a case that had dragged on for nearly 4 decades. Anton's parents, who had spent years searching for their son and hoping for answers, finally had some measure of justice. The case also marked a turning point in the way missing children cases were handled. Anton's disappearance was one of the first to be widely covered in the media, and it helped bring about changes in how law enforcement and the public responded to such cases. The Anton Patz case led to the establishment of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and helped shape the protocols for handling missing children cases in the years that followed. For Anton's family, the conviction of Pedro Hernandez was bittersweet. While they had long hoped for justice, the pain of losing their son never truly went away. But at least, after nearly 40 years, they had answers, and a sense of closure that had eluded them for so long. Our final case is one of the most baffling. The murder of Holly Bobo. Holly Bobo's 2011 disappearance gripped Tennessee. Holly Bobo, a 20-year-old nursing student from Darden, Tennessee, vanished without a trace on April 13, 2011. Holly was last seen by her brother, Clint Bobo, who reported seeing her being led away from their home by a man wearing camouflage. At first, it was believed that Holly might have been abducted by a stranger, and the small town of Darden was soon flooded with searchers, volunteers, and law enforcement officers, all desperately trying to find her. The case quickly became a media sensation, with the Bobo family, along with the community, hoping for a safe return. However, as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, hope began to fade. Despite numerous searches and investigations, there was no sign of Holly. The case grew colder, and many began to fear that Holly had become another victim of a violent crime. In September 2014, more than 3 years after Holly's disappearance, her remains were discovered in a wooded area in Decatur County, Tennessee. The discovery of her body, though devastating, provided crucial evidence that could help solve the case. DNA testing confirmed the remains were Holly's, and investigators began to piece together the events leading to her death. The investigation took another major step forward when a man named Zach Adams was arrested in 2014. Zach Adams, a local man with a criminal history, was charged with the murder of Holly Bobo. Evidence suggested that Adams, along with his half-brother, was involved in the abduction and murder. However, it wasn't until 2017 that Adams stood trial for Holly's murder. During the trial, prosecutors presented a case that linked Zach Adams to the crime through physical evidence and witness testimony. It was revealed that Adams had been involved in a violent relationship with his ex-girlfriend, who later became a key witness in the case. She testified that Adams had confessed to kidnapping and killing Holly. Additionally, DNA evidence found at the scene matched Adams's, and a former friend of Adams testified that he had seen Adams with Holly the day she disappeared. Despite the defense's attempts to cast doubt on the evidence, the prosecution's case was strong. Zach Adams was convicted of first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping, and other charges related to the crime. In 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction of Zach Adams brought a sense of closure to Holly's family and the community that had been devastated by her disappearance. For 6 long years, the Bobo family had fought for justice, and their persistence had paid off. Holly's mother, Karen Bobo, spoke out after the conviction, thanking the community for their unwavering support throughout the years. She described the trial as a long-awaited step toward healing, though the pain of losing her daughter would never fully go away. The case also highlighted the important role that the community played in seeking justice for Holly. From the early days of the investigation, local residents, volunteers, and law enforcement officers worked tirelessly to find answers. The case galvanized the entire region, and Holly's story became a symbol of the power of collective action in the face of tragedy. These cases show that no matter how much time passes, the truth can come to light. From cold cases to high-profile mysteries, these stories remind us that justice is possible. Each of these cases shows that, no matter how much time has passed, the pursuit of justice can still lead to the truth. Whether through new evidence, tireless persistence, or the power of technology, these cases prove that even the most complex and long-forgotten mysteries can be solved. The families and communities affected by these tragedies never gave up, and neither did the investigators. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these cases. Your engagement helps bring more attention to these important stories, so make sure to hit that like button and share this video with others who are fascinated by true crime. Next time, we'll explore unsolved mysteries that still haunt investigators today. Stay tuned for our next video, where we dive into some of the most perplexing unsolved cases that continue to baffle law enforcement and the public alike. You won't want to miss it.